bed and life's not fair. Yeah, we have these situations. And you know what? Some of these situations are issues of injustice. And we have a God who cares about these. When we think about the last 3 years of life in this world, there's been a lot of opportunities to say life's not fair. I mentioned the global pandemic. I mentioned lockdown. Like, how terrible was it? We had to be locked down. And then the other side of it, we had to start going places again. Life's not fair. And all the canceled holiday plans. Life's not fair. And that summer without travel. Life's not fair. You got one. Oh, the right to vote. Yeah. Yeah. For some people in some places, the life's not fair. We mentioned illness. And many of you had to say goodbye to a loved one in the last number of years. And life's not fair. In fact, we've been through things that were hard. And the politics of people turning against one another in our world, that's been hard. And financial struggles. Everyone here knows someone who's been going through financial struggles. It might be your neighbor, it might be your friend, it might be your coworker, it might be that you don't know it, they're going through it, but they are. It might be you. And families that can't get along. We all have our struggles that we face. And trying to raise kids or grandkids in this crazy, upside-down, mixed-up world where everyone's so busy. And we look at this world and we're thinking, there's war going on. And it might get worse. And even besides that, loneliness and depression, mental illness is on the rise because people are struggling. You know what it is to go through something hard. If you've been part of this congregation from the beginning, you remember saying goodbye to a place, a spiritual home. And it was heartbreaking and painful. And you said goodbye not just to a place, but a way of being a church. And it's because you believed you could become something new and it was worth it. You had that hope of being a new church and working together to make a difference and seeing the next generation find the hope that you found in Jesus. But it's been hard. And you've made new friends along the way. You've formed together into a new congregation. It's funny, some of you don't know this, I'll tell you. This church is the merger of 3 congregations. But the funny thing is, you spend time with the people here, you're in a group of them, you can't tell who came from what church. Because we've come together as one. You've lost friends too. These last number of years, politics has divided us. People's disagreeing on social issues, it's divided us. Friendships have been lost. Family members stopped speaking to each other. See if this sounds familiar. At some point in the last number of years, God called you to do something really hard and you believed in it and you knew it was worth it. But the people you thought were your friends, who didn't understand, mocked you every chance they got. It's tempting when facing hard things to give up. It's tempting when facing hard things to get down and to self-isolate. But because of God's grace, we can tell a different story. We worship a God who never quits, who loves us, who doesn't give up. Our scripture reader is going to come forward here. As Melinda does, I invite you to actually join in as Melinda reads the scripture. When you see the word, his love never quits, would you say those words with her? His love never quits. Let's practice this together. We'll say it together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. His love never quits.
Okay. I'll be reading Psalm 136, verse 1. Verses 4 through 9, 13 through 16, and 23 through 26. Thank God, he deserves your thanks. His love never quits. Thank the miracle-working God. His love never quits. The God whose skill formed the cosmos. His love never quits. The God who laid out earth on ocean foundations. His love never quits. The God who filled the skies with light. His love never quits. The sun to watch over the day.
His love never quits.
Moon and stars as guardians of the night. His love never quits. The God who split the Red Sea right in half. His love never quits. Led Israel right through the middle. His love never quits. Dumped Pharaoh and his army in the sea. His love never quits. The God who marched his people through the desert. His love never quits. God remembered us when we were down. His love never quits. Rescued us from the trampling boot. His love never quits. Takes care of everyone in time of need.
His love never quits.
Thank God who did it all. His love never quits.
As you look back, I actually want you to shout it out. As you look back over these last 3 years of your own lives and this church's life, when have you seen times and signs that God's love never quits? Might be something at home, might be something at work, it might be something in your family, it might be something in this congregation. Shout it out, signs that God's love never quits. Yeah. Healing. God's love never quits. God heals. Yes. Friendships. You bet. Friendships. God's love never quits. Challenges. Even in the challenges, you see signs. God's love never quits. Where are some others?
During a disaster.
During a disaster. Even then, God's love never quits. Yes. Healthy. Find that you're healthy. Yes. To see it, God's love never quits.
Sustenance. In getting old.
Sustenance, even in getting old. God's love never quits. Yeah. Even in heartache, God's love never quits. And healing miracles. You got the miracle you needed. God's love never quits.
Judgment.
Even when you're facing judgment from other people, God's love, it never quits. Having a birthday. Oh, your birthday? Oh, neat. Happy birthday to him. And all these times, we know God's love never quits. And the scripture we just read, we heard the story of God's people who were in slavery in Egypt. And they needed the miracles of God, and they received it. God goes to Moses and says, Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh. I know you have a speech impediment. I know you stutter. I want you to go to Pharaoh. And I want you to tell Pharaoh that the God whose love never quits says, let my people go. Pharaoh says no. But God's love never quits. And so the people of Egypt experienced the plagues of God to set God's people free. God sets his people free from Egypt. And then finally the Pharaoh says, okay, you can go. And they get going. They get running. They run and they run and they get all the way to the edge of the sea and they get stuck. And raise your hand here if you've ever been stuck in a no-win situation. When you got an army on one side and an ocean on the other. And God heard his children then. And God will hear his children now. That's what we believe. That when you're chased by an enemy who won't leave you alone, whether that's a person or a spiritual enemy, or an emotional enemy, or a habit you just can't shake, or a story from your past, an experience that you don't know how to deal with, or the consequences of a poor decision, God's love never quits. And this God parts the sea. Can you believe it? The miracle. And the God who split the sea right in half and let the people through, led the Israel right through the middle. See, God answered prayer right then. God saved. God moved in power. And God can move in power for you with the things that you're going through. God can set you free. I say this as someone who's prayed with enough people to say, we were praying that they would experience freedom from one thing or another, and they did. God can bring healing. That's not a promise that every time you pray for something, your wish is granted. It's just that God does these things. And it reminds us that God's love never quits. God still answers prayer. The people of Israel went running across the sea. They got to the other side. Pharaoh's army comes after them. And the way this psalm puts it, in Psalm 136:15, he dumped Pharaoh's army into the sea. Because God's love never quits. I'm asking, what are you praying for? What are you praying that God will dump into the sea for you? Do you have it in mind? I know I have some of them in mind for me. What are you saying, God? I want you to dump this issue into the sea. This is something I can't solve on my own. I need you to solve this for me. See, we've seen God's love for this congregation as we've wandered through the wilderness. As we move from location to location to location. God marched his people through the desert. God led us through where we needed to go. And it's the funny thing. In the midst of the wilderness and the desert, it seems like a struggle. But when you look back, you realize God led you through there in the ways that you needed to become the people that you are today. Have you ever wandered through the wilderness? God provided a way then for the people of God. And God will provide a way now. We've seen God do it. God's led his people over and over. As a church, we trust in God for our future. What's coming after this? We're at year 3. One of the prayers that our church prayed before we even formed together, before any articles of incorporation were signed, we were praying a prayer, God, help us build a church that lasts 100 years. We're in year 3. What is God going to do next? Who are the people that need to experience God's grace? Have you ever been wandering around? And you finally stopped and you said, okay, God, I'm ready to listen now. I'm ready to hear what you have to say to me. Soak in these words here from Psalm 136. Soak in these words, and as you do, call out the chorus with me. Starting at verse 23. God remembered us when we were down. His love never quits. Rescued us from the trampling boot. His love never quits. Takes care of everyone in their time of need. His love never quits. Thank God who did it all. His love never quits. When Jesus began traveling from town to town, preaching good news for people, his message was essentially the same as this psalm. God's love hasn't quit. Never quits. Because to most people then and to most people now, life doesn't seem fair. And with what you're going through these days, maybe life doesn't seem fair. I don't know what that looks like for each of you. I know for many of you, whether it's loneliness and depression or illness or sickness or loss of friendships, I know that God's love hasn't quit on you. I know that the reign of God is not far off in the future. Jesus said that. The reign of God is not waiting off in heaven until you die. Jesus said that. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's right here. It's around the corner. It's ready for you to experience it. God's love hasn't quit. God will not abandon you. God's love never quits. So today I invite you to call out to God. Trust your cares to God.